When my eyes opened after 3 weeks in a coma, I didn't see my husband's concerned face. I saw his phone lighting up with a text about moving my grandmother's priceless blue vase to make room for her new artwork. As Richard lunged to hide the evidence, a strange clarity cut through my medication haze. While most would crumble upon discovering their spouse had moved his mistress into their ancestral home during a near-death experience, I felt only a cold, strategic focus forming. What Richard failed to understand as he stammered excuses by my hospital bed was that the Montgomery dynasty hadn't survived 2 centuries by accepting betrayal. Soon enough, the woman rearranging my heirlooms would be pulling weeds on my estate, grounds, never realizing her new employer was the same wife her lover had so catastrophically underestimated. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was driving back from Rosewood Estate, the sprawling historical property that had been in my family for generations. As the sole heir to the Montgomery fortune and the estate's manager, I had been meeting with potential clients about hosting a series of exclusive culinary retreats, a new venture to expand our revenue streams beyond the traditional wedding, and tourism packages. I never saw the truck that hydroplaned across the median. The doctors later told me I was lucky to be alive. 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, traumatic brain injury, and a shattered femur. They placed me in a medically induced coma to help my brain heal, uncertain if I would ever wake with my faculties intact. I remember nothing of those 3 weeks, but I remember with perfect clarity the moment I regained consciousness and saw Richard's phone light up with that innocuous yet devastating message about a blue vase, my grandmother's antique Chinese porcelain that had always sat on the entryway table. "You're awake." Thank God. Richard's face appeared in my field of vision, blocking the phone he'd hastily shoved into his pocket. "Don't try to talk. You've got a tube in. I'll get to the doctor." His eyes, those same hazel eyes I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago at a charity gala, couldn't quite meet mine. I'd spent my life reading people. As the manager of a multi-million-dollar historical estate that hosted everything from diplomatic gatherings to royal garden parties, I'd negotiated with some of the most demanding clients imaginable. I could spot insincerity across a crowded ballroom. And now, those same instincts were screaming at me from my hospital bed. The next few days passed in a blur of medical evaluations, breathing exercises, and painful physical therapy sessions. Richard's visits became predictable in their pattern. Arrive at 10 a.m., stay until noon, return at 6 p.m., leave by 8 p.m., always with the excuse of keeping things running at home or checking on estate matters. Always with his phone clutched tightly, always with that slightly distracted air. On the 5th day after waking, when Richard stepped out to take a call, I asked my nurse, Gabriella, for my own phone. "Mr. Montgomery brought it a few days ago," she said, retrieving it from the bedside drawer. "But he mentioned the battery might be dead since the accident." It was, but the hospital room had an outlet nearby. As soon as it powered on, I was flooded with well wishes from friends, staff, and clients. But I wasn't interested in those yet. Instead, I opened my home security app. As the estate manager, I'd installed a comprehensive security system throughout our private residence, which sat on the edge of the Rosewood grounds. It had been a necessary precaution, given the valuable antiques and artwork we owned. What Richard had apparently forgotten was that I could access the cameras remotely. My fingers trembled slightly as I selected the kitchen camera. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. A woman with copper hair was standing at my marble island, chopping vegetables. She moved with the casual comfort of someone in their own home, occasionally calling out to someone off-screen. Then Richard walked into frame, coming behind her to kiss her neck as he reached around for a piece of bell pepper. I didn't make a sound. I didn't drop the phone. Instead, I methodically checked the other cameras. the living room, where my grandmother's antique furniture had been rearranged and new throw pillows added. The master bedroom, where the duvet I'd specially ordered from Italy had been replaced with something in muddy teal. The guest room, now apparently serving as a home office for someone who wasn't me, judging by the unfamiliar laptop and stacks of papers. "Ms. Montgomery, are you all right? Your heart rate is elevated." Gabriella had returned, watching the monitor with concern. I closed the app and managed to smile. "Just overwhelmed by all the messages. Could you help me sit up more, please?" That night when Richard arrived for his evening visit, I studied him with new eyes. The slightly rumpled Oxford shirt, had she ironed it? The lingering scent of a floral perfume I didn't wear? The way he kept our conversation focused on my recovery, deflecting whenever I asked about the estate or our home. "The doctor says I might be moved to the rehabilitation center next week," I said, watching his reaction carefully. That's wonderful news," he replied, but I caught the flash of panic in his eyes. "But isn't it too soon? You've only just regained consciousness." "Apparently, I'm healing faster than expected." I paused. "I was thinking, once I'm settled there, perhaps you could bring me some of my things from home? My tablet, some comfortable clothes, my blue vase to brighten up the room." His face paled visibly. "Your blue vase?" "Yes, the one from my grandmother. It always cheers me up." I kept my voice light, curious how he would handle this. I'm not sure where it is at the moment. We had to move some things when the cleaning service came through." Another lie. We had never used a cleaning service for the antiques. I had always handled those myself, unwilling to risk damage to family heirlooms. "I see. Well, perhaps just some photos then. The albums in my study would be nice." "Of course," he agreed quickly, relieved by the change in subject. "I'll bring them tomorrow." After he left, I didn't allow myself the luxury of tears or rage. Instead, I reached for my phone again, but this time to send a message to my family's longtime attorney, Eleanor Singh. "Need to speak urgently. Private. Matter. Can you visit tomorrow?" Her response came within minutes. "Of course. 9 a.m. before Richard's usual arrival?" I smiled faintly. Eleanor had known me since I was a child. Of course she would understand the need for discretion. "Perfect. Bring the Rosewood Trust documents and current staff contracts, please." While most people might have immediately confronted their spouse or fallen apart emotionally, my mind was all ready, calculating, assessing, planning. The Montgomery estate had weathered world wars, economic depressions, and family scandals for over 2 centuries. It had survived because each generation of caretakers had been strategic, forward-thinking, and occasionally ruthless when necessary. I hadn't spent my life preserving this legacy only to see it threatened by betrayal. Richard had married into the Montgomery family, bringing his architectural expertise and charm, but little else. The prenuptial agreement had been ironclad, a condition my parents had insisted upon before their untimely death in a sailing accident 10 years ago. What Richard had apparently forgotten was that everything, our home, the estate, the various business ventures, all belonged to the Montgomery Family Trust, of which I was the sole trustee. As I lay in that hospital bed, watching the moonlight cast shadows across the sterile walls, I wasn't plotting revenge. Revenge was emotional, messy, ultimately unsatisfying. No, I was developing a restructuring plan, a strategic realignment of assets, responsibilities, and relationships, and it will begin tomorrow with Eleanor's visit. I spent the night reviewing what I knew about the woman in my house. I hadn't gotten a clear look at her face, but something about her seemed vaguely familiar. The copper hair, the confident way she moved through my kitchen. I scrolled through Richard's social media, something I rarely bothered with, looking for clues. It didn't take long to find her. Olivia Winters, tagged in a photo from a charity event 6 months ago. Richard's arm wasn't around her in the picture, but they stood close enough that I noticed. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Richard attended many events as my representative when I was busy with estate matters. Her profile revealed she was an interior designer who specialized in bringing new life to historical spaces. The yar. Irony wasn't lost on me. She was literally trying to bring new life to my historical home, replacing pieces of my family history with her contemporary vision. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. By morning, when Eleanor arrived with her briefcase and concerned expression, I had already formulated the beginnings of a plan. Not based on emotion or impulse, but on the same careful consideration I gave to every business decision that affected Rosewood Estate. "Catherine," Eleanor said, taking my hand gently, "you look remarkably well for someone who was in a coma 2 weeks ago." "Amazing what betrayal will do for one's constitution," I replied dryly. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up, but she didn't seem entirely surprised. "Tell me everything." And so I did, methodically laying out what I had discovered and what I suspected. Eleanor listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in her small leather-bound notebook. "The good news," she said when I finished, "is that your position is legally unassailable. The trust is explicit. Rosewood and all associated properties remain under your exclusive control. Richard has no claim, regardless of your marriage status." "And the staff contracts?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "As you requested years ago, all include comprehensive non-disclosure agreements and loyalty clauses. Anyone working at Rosewood cannot work for competing estates within a 100-mile radius for 5 years after termination." "Excellent." I shifted slightly, wincing at the pain in my leg. "Now, here's what I need you to do." Eleanor left with a list of precise instructions and a promise to return the following day. When Richard arrived for his morning visit, I greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "You look better today," he said, setting a small vase of store-bought roses on the nightstand, not the fresh-cut blooms from Rosewood's gardens that he could have easily brought. "I feel more like myself," I replied truthfully. "The doctors say my cognitive functions are showing remarkable recovery." A flicker of unease crossed his face. "That's wonderful, darling. In fact," I continued, "I've been thinking clearly about the estate. How are things at Rosewood? Any issues with the Hamilton wedding scheduled for next month?" Richard shifted in his seat. "Everything's under control. Gerald has been managing the bookings admirably." Gerald, our events coordinator, was excellent at execution but had never handled the client relations side of the business. Another lie. "And the house?" I kept my tone conversational. "Any updates I should know about?" "Just routine maintenance." His hand twitched toward his phone as it vibrated in his pocket. "Nothing worth bothering you with during recovery." I nodded thoughtfully. "I've been meaning to ask. My grandmother's jewelry box, the one in my bedside drawer. Could you bring it? The nurses say familiar objects might help with my cognitive exercises." The color drained from his face. "Your jewelry box?" "Yes, the rosewood one with the mother-of-pearl inlay. It should be right where I always keep it." "I'll look for it," he managed, swallowing hard. "Thank you." I reached for the water cup, letting him help me with the straw. "Oh, and Richard? Could you take a photo of our bedroom for me? I'm feeling homesick." The panic in his eyes was unmistakable now. "The bedroom is being painted. It's a mess right now." "Painted? We just refreshed it last spring." I frowned. "What color?" "A sort of sage green. I thought it might be more soothing for your recovery." I had specifically chosen the bedroom's pale blue color to complement the eastern light that filled the room each morning. Olivia Winters had clearly made herself at home in more ways than one. "How thoughtful," I murmured. "And who recommended this painter?" They must be good to trust with our antique moldings. Richard glanced at his watch. Actually, I should check on that. The foreman promised updates this morning. Of course. I smiled again, that same empty smile. Don't let me keep you. After he left, practically fleeing the room, I closed my eyes and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of pure white-hot rage. 5 minutes to feel the betrayal, the violation of my home, my legacy, my marriage. 5 minutes to acknowledge that while I was fighting for my life, Richard had been moving his mistress into the house my great-great-grandfather had built. When those 5 minutes ended, I opened my eyes, clear and focused. Emotion was now a luxury I couldn't afford. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Blackwood, Rosewood's head of security and the grandson of my father's most trusted employee. Ms. Montgomery. His deep voice carried genuine warmth. It's so good to hear from you. Directly, how are you feeling? Better every day, Marcus. I need your help with something delicate. Anything, he replied without hesitation. I need a complete security report for the main house and grounds. Access logs, camera footage, visitor records, everything for the past month. And I need it. Sent directly to me, not through Richard. A brief pause. I understand. May I ask? It's a precautionary measure, I interrupted smoothly. My accident has made me realize how vulnerable Rosewood could be if something happened to me. I'm reviewing all our protocols. Of course, I'll compile everything immediately. Thank you, Marcus. And one more thing. This stays between us. After ending the call, I opened my email to find Eleanor had already sent the first documents I'd requested, a complete financial audit of Rosewood's accounts for the past year. As I suspected, there were several irregularities in the past few months. Significant withdrawals from our operating account, expenses coded as property improvements, without corresponding vendor invoices, and a new contractor added to our payroll, Winter Designs LLC. Olivia hadn't just moved into my home. She was being paid from my family's accounts to redecorate it. The audacity was almost impressive. I was scrolling through the transactions when Dr. Hayes entered for her morning rounds. Your vital signs are remarkably improved, she noted, reviewing my chart. How's the pain today? Manageable, I replied. Doctor, when do you think I might be able to transition to the rehabilitation facility? She studied me over her glasses. Eager to move forward, I see. Actually, your progress has been exceptional. If the next few days continue this trend, we could look at transfers by the end of next week. And what about a brief visit home before then? Just a few hours, with proper medical supervision? Dr. Hayes frowned slightly. That would be highly unusual at this stage of recovery. I understand. It's just... I let vulnerability show in my expression, a calculated move. Being in familiar surroundings might help with the cognitive therapy, even just an afternoon. Let me consider it, she said, making a note in my chart. If, and this is a significant if, your physical therapy goes exceptionally well this week, we might arrange something, with a nurse present at all times, of course. Of course, I agreed readily. Thank you, doctor. After she left, I received Marcus's security report. The footage confirmed what I already knew. Olivia Winters had been a regular visitor to Rosewood, even before my accident, often arriving late in the evening for project consultations with Richard. After my hospitalization, she began staying overnight. 2 weeks into my coma, moving trucks had arrived. The logs showed her using the security code reserved for family members. I studied her face in the footage. Young, at least 15 years. Younger than my 42. Pretty in a deliberately cultivated way. Always dressed impeccably in clothing that managed to be both professional and suggestive. In one clip, she stood in my garden, gesturing animatedly about changes she envisioned, while Richard gazed at her with the admiration he once reserved for me. I felt nothing as I watched them together. The initial shock had crystallized into something colder, more focused. This wasn't just about my husband's infidelity. It was about the calculated invasion of my heritage, my legacy. Olivia Winters wasn't merely sleeping with my husband. She was systematically replacing me, erasing traces of the Montgomery history from the very walls that had stood for generations. By afternoon, Eleanor returned with more documents and news. "I've spoken with the estate's board of trustees," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. Without revealing specifics, I explained that you're contemplating significant operational changes upon your return. They've granted provisional approval for whatever restructuring you deem necessary. "And the other matter?" Eleanor smiled, a rare expression on her typically serious face. "As you suspected, Ms. Winters has been approaching several of Rosewood's high-profile clients, offering her services for coordinated estate design using her unique insider perspective on historical properties. She's trying to poach my clients, using my family's reputation," I said, the only hint of anger in the slight tightening of my voice. "Yes, but rather clumsily. The Whitmores immediately contacted me, concerned about the propriety of it all. The Whitmores had been hosting their family reunions at Rosewood for 3 generations. Their loyalty wasn't to Richard or to some newcomer. It was to the Montgomery name and the standards we had maintained for centuries." "Perfect," I murmured. "And the legal framework for my proposal?" Eleanor removed a document from her briefcase. "It's aggressive but entirely defensible given the circumstances. Richard has violated multiple clauses of both your prenuptial agreement and his employment contract with the estate." I reviewed the papers carefully. "This timing is crucial, Eleanor. Everything must be in place before Richard realizes what's happening." "It will be," she assured me. "Catherine, I've known you since you were a child. I've never seen you like this." I looked up from the documents. "Like what?" "So contained. Your parents would be proud of your composure, but they would also want you to acknowledge the personal betrayal." I set the papers aside. "There will be time for feelings later. Right now, Rosewood needs protection, and that requires clarity, not emotion." Eleanor nodded slowly. "What's your next move?" "A surprise visit home," I replied, reaching for my phone. "It's time to accelerate my recovery schedule." The Montgomery legacy began in 1819 when my ancestor, William Montgomery, a Scottish immigrant with impeccable taste and shrewd business sense, purchased the failing Rosewood plantation from a cash-strapped Virginia aristocrat. Where others saw decay, William saw potential. Within a decade, he had transformed the property into the premier social venue for the East Coast elite. For 2 centuries, Rosewood remained in Montgomery hands, surviving wars, depressions, and social upheavals. Each generation added to its legacy. My great-grandfather converting the farming operations to gardens and event spaces in the 1920s, my grandmother opening the grounds for selective tourism in the 1950s, my father establishing the Historical Preservation Trust in the 1980s. When my parents' sailboat capsized during an unexpected storm off the Maine coast 12 years ago, I became the sole steward of this legacy at 30. I'd been groomed for the role my entire life, shadowing my father through meetings, learning the intricacies of historic preservation, understanding the delicate balance between tradition and necessary innovation. What I hadn't been prepared for was doing it alone. Richard. Harrington entered my life at a charity auction 6 months after my parents' deaths. Handsome, charming, with an architect's appreciation for historical structures, and an uncanny ability to make me laugh despite my grief. He pursued me with the perfect balance of persistence and patience. When he proposed a year later beneath the rose trellis my great-grandmother had planted, it felt like fate. "You won't be alone anymore," he had promised, slipping my grandmother's ring onto my finger. "We'll protect Rosewood together." I believed him. More importantly, I trusted him. Against Eleanor's advice, I appointed Richard as Rosewood's architectural director, giving him authority over the physical structures that comprise the estate's heart. He exceeded my expectations initially, overseeing restorations that honored history while incorporating modern necessities, charming donors and historical societies alike. Our marriage worked because we each had our domain. I managed the business operations, client relationships, and staff. He handled the buildings, grounds, and public image. We were partners in the truest sense, our strengths complementing each other's weaknesses, or so I thought. What I realized during those quiet hospital hours, reviewing security footage and financial records, was how skillfully Richard had exploited my trust. Over the past year, as Rosewood's profile rose under our joint leadership, he had gradually positioned himself as the estate's public face, attending events I was too busy to join, giving interviews about our vision, subtly elevating his role. In the legacy I had inherited, I had been so focused on honoring my family's traditions while expanding our business model that I missed the warning signs. His insistence on separate business accounts for tax purposes, his increasingly frequent professional consultations with designers and historians, and his subtle criticisms of traditions I held sacred. The physical therapist interrupted my reflections, arriving for our afternoon session with determined cheerfulness. "Ready to work, Ms. Montgomery? Dr. Hayes mentioned you're hoping for a home visit, which means we need to get you mobile." For the next hour, I pushed through exercises that left me trembling with exhaustion and pain. Each movement was agony, but I refused to show weakness. The Montgomery family motto, engraved above, Rosewood's entrance echoed in my mind, "Fortitude Vincimus, through endurance we conquer." By the time Richard returned for his evening visit, I had negotiated a significant victory with my medical team. A 4-hour supervised home visit in 3 days' time, contingent on my continued progress. I said nothing about this to Richard, instead asking benign questions about estate operations and accepting his vague answers with apparent contentment. "You seem different today," he observed as visiting hours ended. "More yourself." "Recovery has its ups and downs," I replied, smoothly. "Today is just a good day." After he left, Marcus called with another update. "Ms. Montgomery, there's something you should know. Mr. Harrington has been removing items from the main house. Paintings, silver, some smaller antiques." My hand tightened around the phone. "When?" "Over the past 2 weeks. Always when most staff have left for the day. Do you have footage?" "Yes, ma'am. I've included it in the secure folder." "And does anyone else on staff know about this?" Mrs. Simmons noticed some missing pieces from the silver collection. She attempted to ask Mr. Harrington about it, but he dismissed her concerns, saying you had authorized a professional cleaning, Martha. Simmons had been Rosewood's housekeeper for 30 years. She knew every piece of silver, china, and linen in the vast estate catalogs. Her memory was more reliable than any inventory system. "Thank you, Marcus. Please ask Mrs. Simmons to quietly document everything she notices missing, but not to confront Richard again." "Yes, ma'am." "And Ms. Montgomery? The staff sends their best wishes for your recovery. Rosewood isn't the same without you." His sincerity warmed me. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll be home soon." The next morning, Eleanor arrived with a portfolio of documents and a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "It's all arranged," she announced without preamble. "The board has unanimously approved your request for a comprehensive audit of Rosewood's operations, citing the need for clarity during your recovery. The auditors arrive tomorrow, beginning with the financial accounts and the physical inventory." Richard's reaction? Initial resistance, followed by grudging acceptance when the board chairman made it clear this wasn't a request. "He's nervous. Catherine made a point of mentioning how he's been single-handedly managing everything during your absence." I smiled thinly. "Has he indeed? How convenient that we'll now have documentation of his management style." Eleanor pulled out another document. I've also drafted the employment contract you requested. It's unorthodox, to say the least. But legal? Entirely, though I doubt anyone has ever constructed quite such a creative position at a historical estate. I reviewed the contract carefully. Make 2 copies, with the name fields blank for now. I'll fill those in personally when the time comes. Eleanor hesitated. Catherine, are you certain about this approach? There are simpler ways to handle the situation. Simpler, yes, but less effective. I handed the contract back to her. This isn't about punishment, Eleanor. It's about restoring proper order while extracting maximum value from a difficult situation. And Richard? What do you plan to do about your marriage? The question caught me off guard. In all my strategic planning, I had thought of Richard primarily as an operational problem to solve, a threat to Rosewood to neutralize. The emotional dimension, the end of a 10-year marriage, the personal betrayal, had remained carefully compartmentalized. One battle at a time, I finally said. First, I secure Rosewood. Then, I'll address my marriage. Eleanor nodded, understanding the priorities that had guided Montgomery decisions for generations. Family legacy first, personal concerns second. The next 2 days passed in a blur of physical therapy, medical evaluations, and discreet communications with the audit team, now working at Rosewood. Richard's visits grew shorter, his excuses about estate emergencies more frequent. The audit was clearly consuming his attention, exactly as I had intended. On the morning of my scheduled home visit, Dr. Hayes performed a final evaluation. Your recovery continues to defy expectations, she said, reviewing my latest test results. Though I still have concerns about this home visit. 4 hours is a long time in your condition. I'll have the nurse with me, I reminded her. And it's important for my mental recovery to reconnect with home, she sighed. Very well. The transport team will arrive at 11 and you must return by 3. No exceptions. Understood, doctor, and thank you. After she left, I called Eleanor. It's confirmed. We proceed as planned. The audit team will ensure Richard remains occupied in the South Wing records room, she assured me. They have instructions to raise complex questions about expenditures that will require his full attention. And Olivia? According to staff reports, she typically visits the garden nursery on Thursday afternoons to select plants for her redesign of the formal gardens. Perfect. Everyone would be exactly where I needed them to be. I hung up and began preparing. For my return to Rosewood, mentally rehearsing each step of the plan I had crafted. Unlike Richard, who had acted on impulse and opportunity, my approach had been methodical, comprehensive, leaving nothing to chance. The physical pain of my injuries was still considerable, but it pales compared to my determination. As the morning nurse helped me dress in something other than a hospital gown for the first time in weeks, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Thinner, certainly. Paler. But my eyes held the same resolute expression that had carried generations of Montgomerys through adversity. Richard had mistaken my focus on Rosewood's operations as distraction or disinterest in his activities. He had interpreted my trust as inattention, my delegation as disengagement. By day's end, he would understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. At precisely 11 o'clock, the medical transport team arrived with a wheelchair and a private ambulance. The home care nurse, a capable-looking woman named Sophia, reviewed my medications and mobility restrictions with the hospital staff. "Ready, Ms. Montgomery?" she asked, as they prepared to transfer me from the hospital bed to the wheelchair. "More than ready," I replied, steeling myself against the pain of movement. "It's time to go home." The drive to Rosewood took exactly 37 minutes, each one bringing me closer to confronting the reality I had only seen through security footage. As the ambulance turned onto the estate's elm-lined drive, I felt a complex mix of emotions. The comfort of homecoming tangled with the knowledge that my sanctuary had been violated. Rosewood Manor appeared on the horizon, its Georgian architecture a testament to 2 centuries of careful stewardship. I noted with a critical eye that the spring flower beds had been altered, the traditional Montgomery tulip pattern replaced with some modern arrangement that clashed with the house's symmetry. Marcus met us at the side entrance, his stoic expression betraying only the slightest relief at seeing me. "Welcome home, Ms. Montgomery," he said, holding the door as the medical team maneuvered my wheelchair. "We've prepared the morning room as you requested. South-facing light, accessible bathroom, and privacy." "Thank you, Marcus. Is everything in place for today?" He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Harrington is with the auditors in the records room. They've encountered some discrepancies that require his immediate attention." "And our other guest?" "Left 20 minutes ago for the garden center. Mrs. Simmons estimates she'll be gone at least 2 hours based on previous patterns." "Excellent. Please notify Mrs. Simmons that I've arrived, but no one else." As we entered the house, I was struck by how much had changed in just 6 weeks. The entryway, once adorned with Montgomery family portraits dating back generations, now featured modern abstract paintings. The antique console table had been replaced with a glass and metal monstrosity. Even the air smelled different. My grandmother's signature rose potpourri was replaced by some generic designer fragrance. Sophia, my home care nurse, misinterpreted my silence. "Are you in pain, Ms. Montgomery? We can take a moment if you need to rest." "I'm fine," I assured her, though the pain was indeed intensifying, just reacclimating. The morning room had thankfully been spared major alterations, perhaps because it was seldom used by anyone but me. Its walls still held the botanical prints my grandmother had collected, and my favorite reading chair remained positioned by the window overlooking the rose garden. "Sophia, would you mind giving me a moment with Mrs. Simmons?" I asked as the housekeeper appeared in the doorway, her familiar face a welcome sight. "Of course. I'll just set up your medications in the adjoining bathroom." Once we were alone, Martha approached, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Ms. Catherine, thank God you've come home. Things haven't been right since... since." "No, Martha. Tell me everything." For the next 30 minutes, Martha provided a meticulous account of the changes that had occurred in my absence, valuable items that had disappeared, staff whose hours had been reduced, traditions that had, been abandoned. Most disturbing were the social events that had been held at Rosewood without proper documentation. They had parties, Ms. Catherine. Not the proper kind we host for clients, but loud affairs with people we've never seen before. Using the good china, drinking from the crystal that's been in your family for generations. My jaw tightened. "When was the last one?" "Saturday night. 15 people, dinner in the formal dining room. That woman," Martha had refused to use Olivia's name since she arrived, "sat in your chair at the head of the table. Served your grandmother's sherry in the Waterford glasses." The image stung more than I cared to admit. I had grown up at that table, learning proper etiquette under my grandmother's watchful eye, absorbing the stories of my ancestors that made Rosewood more than just a beautiful property. "And the staff's response," Martha's expression darkened. "Most are horrified, Ms. Catherine. Those who've been with the Montgomerys for years. We've been documenting everything, just waiting for you to recover. But there are new people too, hired by her to replace those Mr. Harrington let go." This was new information. "Who's been dismissed?" "Tom Jenkins from maintenance. He questioned some changes to the east garden wall." "Claire from the tour staff. She objected when historic furniture was removed from the public rooms. And young Peter from the stables. Apparently, Mr. Harrington's new friends wanted to ride the horses without proper supervision." All loyal employees, some whose families had worked at Rosewood for generations. My anger, carefully contained until now, threatened to surface. I took a deep breath, regaining control. "Thank you, Martha. Your loyalty means everything. Could you bring me the household ledger and the visitor logs for the past month?" "Right away, Miss Catherine. While waiting, I asked Sophia to help me to the window. The pain of movement was excruciating, but I needed to see the gardens, my mother's passion project, and my own favorite retreat. As expected, changes were visible there too. Historic plantings removed, new modernist sculptures installed where classical statuary had stood for a century. Martha returned with the requested documents and something else, a small blue notebook. "This is my personal record," she said, placing it on top of the official logs. "Everything they've done, everyone who's visited, all the items I've noticed missing." I didn't trust the official records, not after Mr. Harrington told Claire to clean them up before the auditors arrived. I flipped through the notebook, impressed by Martha's attention to detail. Names, dates, times, specific items, all meticulously documented. Combined with Marcus's security footage and Eleanor's financial audit, it provided irrefutable evidence of Richard and Olivia's systematic exploitation of Rosewood during my incapacitation. "Martha, please ask Marcus to join us, and then find Eleanor. She should be in the library by now." While I waited, I reviewed the official visitor logs, noting the discrepancies between these sanitized records and Martha's detailed accounts. Richard had clearly attempted to cover their tracks, probably anticipating questions once I recovered. His mistake was underestimating the loyalty of staff who had served the Montgomery family for decades. Marcus arrived, quietly closing the door. Behind him, "The auditors have requested financial documentation from last quarter that Mr. Harrington seems unable to locate. He's quite distressed." "Good. That should keep him occupied. I need to see the East Wing." Marcus hesitated. "Ms. Montgomery, that might be difficult in your condition. They've made significant changes to the private apartments." "I'm aware, but I need to see for myself." Eleanor entered before Marcus could respond. "Catherine, are you certain that's wise? The emotional impact is something I'm prepared for." I interrupted. "I need to document everything personally before confronting Richard." Eleanor and Marcus exchanged concerned glances, but both knew better than to argue with Montgomery on their own territory. Sophia, returning from the bathroom, was less easily convinced. "As your medical supervisor, I must advise against additional physical strain. Your pain levels are manageable," I insisted. "This is necessary, Sophia. I promise to rest afterward." Reluctantly, they conceded. Marcus brought a portable wheelchair ramp to navigate the few steps between wings, while Eleanor gathered her tablet to photograph evidence. Sophia hovered anxiously, monitoring my vital signs and carrying emergency medications. Nothing could have prepared me for the transformation of my private quarters. The sitting room where 5 generations of Montgomery women had taken their morning coffee was now an ultra-modern workspace, with Olivia's design materials scattered across a glass desk. My grandmother's hand-woven Persian rugs had been replaced with stark white carpeting. The walls, once adorned with family photographs, now displayed abstract canvases in jarring colors. But it was the bedroom that truly tested my composure. The Yao. 4-poster bed where I had been born, where my mother had been born, where every Montgomery heir had entered the world for over a century. Gone. In its place stood a platform monstrosity of chrome and leather. My antique vanity had disappeared, replaced by built-in minimalist cabinetry. Even the wallpaper, hand-painted silk imported from China by my great-grandmother, had been covered with trendy charcoal gray paint. "Document everything," I instructed Eleanor, my voice tight with controlled emotion. "Every changed fixture, every missing heirloom." For the next hour, we moved methodically through the private wing, creating a comprehensive record of alterations and missing items. My physical pain intensified with each discovery, but I refused to show weakness. By the time we finished, Eleanor had compiled an extensive digital catalog of changes, cross-referenced with the estate's historical inventory. "Catherine, your color doesn't look good," Sophia finally intervened. "Your blood pressure is elevated, and you're overdue for pain medication. We need to return to the morning room." I reluctantly agreed, my strength flagging despite my determination. Back in the morning room, I allowed Sophia to administer medication and check my vital signs while Eleanor organized the evidence we'd gathered. The audit team reports Richard is growing increasingly agitated, Marcus said, checking his phone. He's made 3 calls in the past hour, all to the same number. Olivia, I confirmed. He's warning her. Should I delay her return? Marcus asked. The security team could create a minor road issue. I considered this, then shook my head. No. Let her come. In fact, call Gerald at the main office and ask him to direct her to the morning room when she arrives. It's time for introductions. Eleanor looked concerned. Catherine, you've gathered tremendous evidence. We could proceed legally without a direct confrontation. This isn't just legal, Eleanor. It's personal. For the first time, I allowed my anger to show. They didn't just steal objects. They tried to erase my family's legacy. I want to see their faces when they realize I know everything. The pain medication began to take effect, bringing blessed relief and renewed clarity. I straightened in my wheelchair, smoothed my hair, and prepared for the confrontation that would determine Rosewood's future, and my own. Marcus, please inform me the moment Olivia enters the property, I instructed. Eleanor, are the contracts ready? She nodded, patting her portfolio. Everything as you requested. Good. I gazed out at the rose garden, drawing strength from the land that had sustained my family for generations. Then we're prepared for the next phase. Marcus's phone vibrated exactly 19 minutes later. He glanced at the screen, then at me. She's passing through the main gates now. And Richard? Still occupied with the auditors. They've moved on to questioning the invoices from Winter. Designs. Perfect timing. I adjusted my position in the wheelchair, ensuring I would be facing the door when Olivia entered. Sophia stood discreetly in the corner, monitoring my condition, but understanding the importance of appearing solely in command. Eleanor took her position slightly behind me, legal documents arranged in her portfolio. Martha had prepared tea service, using my personal porcelain set that had somehow escaped Olivia's redecorating frenzy, and positioned it on the table beside me. Ms. Montgomery, Marcus said from the doorway. Ms. Winters has arrived. Please, show her in. The woman who entered the morning room was momentarily frozen in shock, her copper hair gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, her fashionable sundress incongruous with her expression of absolute horror. Ms. Winters, I greeted her calmly, how kind of you to join me for tea in my home. I don't understand, she stammered, her eyes darting between me and the door, clearly calculating whether to flee. Richard said you were still hospitalized. That I was incapacitated? I supplied. Unable to return to Rosewood, unaware of your renovation efforts? Color drained from her face. There's been a misunderstanding. I'm just a design consultant. Richard hired me to... I know exactly what Richard hired you to do, I interrupted smoothly. And what he failed to mention about your employment. Please, sit down. This conversation will be easier if we're both comfortable. Her instinct for self-preservation warred visibly with her desire to escape. Finally, she perched on the edge of an armchair, as far from me as the room allowed. Tea? I offered, gesturing to the service. No, thank you, she replied, her voice slightly steadier. Mrs. Harrington? Ms. Montgomery, I corrected. The Montgomery name has been attached to Rosewood for 200 years. It's not something I relinquish lightly, regardless of marital status. She swallowed hard. Ms. Montgomery, I believe. There's been a serious misunderstanding about my relationship with Richard. Has there? I took a deliberate sip of tea. Let's review the facts, shall we? According to Rosewood's financial records, Winter Designs LLC has billed the estate for $157,000 in redesign services over the past 4 months. According to security footage, you've spent approximately 37 nights in my home since my accident 6 weeks ago. According to staff observations, You've removed family heirlooms, rearranged historical furniture, hosted unauthorized social gatherings, and even dismissed long-term employees. With each point, her complexion grew paler. By the final accusation, she was gripping the armchair with white-knuckled intensity. Richard said he had authority. Richard lied, I stated flatly. Rosewood Estate is held in the Montgomery Family Trust, of which I am the sole trustee. Richard's position as architectural director granted him limited operational authority, not ownership rights. Every decision you made together violated both his employment contract and our prenuptial agreement. I didn't know, she whispered, a hint of genuine horror creeping into her voice. He told me you had discussed renovating before your accident, that you wanted to modernize Rosewood's image. Did he also tell you to wear my grandmother's jewelry? I asked quietly. To sleep in the bed where generations of my family were born? To host dinner parties with my ancestors' china? She flinched as if struck. I never meant. Intention is irrelevant when discussing legal liability, Ms. Winters. Eleanor stepped forward, opening her portfolio. Winter Designs has accepted payment for services rendered under fraudulent pretenses. Additionally, you've been documented removing personal property from the Montgomery estate without authorization. Olivia's professional composure crumbled completely. I can explain. Richard assured me everything had been approved. The items were being stored, not stolen. I'm a professional designer. I would never knowingly. Fascinating how quickly loyalty dissolves when consequences appear, I observed. Just moments ago, you were prepared to defend your relationship with my husband. Now you're distancing yourself from his decisions. Tears welled in her eyes. Whether from genuine remorse or calculated sympathy-seeking, I couldn't tell. What are you going to do? Press charges? I studied her carefully. Despite everything, there was something almost pitiful about her desperation. She wasn't the mastermind here, merely a willing accomplice, blinded by ambition and Richard's promises. That depends on your next decision, I said, nodding to Eleanor, who placed a document on the table between us. This is a termination of services agreement for Winter Designs, requiring immediate cessation of all work at Rosewood and return of any removed items within 48 hours. It includes a confidentiality clause preventing you from discussing Rosewood, the Montgomery family, or your relationship with Richard Harrington, in perpetuity. Her hand trembled as she reached for the document, scanning its contents with a growing alarm. This would effectively end my design career. The non-compete clause covers the entire East Coast historical property market. Yes, I agreed simply. Actions have consequences. And if I refuse? Eleanor placed a second document beside the first. Then we proceed with legal action for theft, fraud, and willful damage to protected historical property. Given the evidence we've compiled, you would likely face not only financial ruin, but potential criminal charges. Olivia's breath caught. You can't be serious. Ms. Winters, I leaned forward slightly. You've been sleeping in my bed, wearing my jewelry, and spending my money while I recovered from injuries that nearly killed me. What exactly did you expect would happen when I returned home? The reality of her situation finally seemed to penetrate. Richard said you wouldn't fight. That you cared more about Rosewood's public image than your marriage. Richard, I replied coldly, has severely misjudged both my priorities and my resolve. She stared at the documents, defeat evident in the slump of her shoulders. I have no choice, do I? There's always a choice, I countered, though some options are certainly more painful than others. Eleanor placed a pen on the table. Olivia hesitated only briefly before signing the termination agreement, her signature barely legible through her trembling. What happens now? She asked, pushing the signed document away as if it might burn her. Now, I said, withdrawing a third document from Eleanor's portfolio. We discuss an alternative arrangement. Her head snapped up. Alternative? Your design business is finished, Ms. Winters. That's non-negotiable. However, your knowledge of exactly what has happened at Rosewood during my absence is valuable to me. I slid the new document toward her. This is an employment contract. Confusion replaced fear in her expression. You're offering me a job? After everything? Not just any job. A very specific position with very specific terms. I gestured to the contract. Rosewood requires a new groundskeeper, specifically for the formal garden restoration. The position includes a modest salary, accommodation in the staff quarters, and most importantly, a clean slate professionally, provided you meet certain conditions. She scanned the document, her eyes widening. This is indentured servitude. 3 years with restricted communication, prohibition from interior design work, mandatory residence on property, weekly accounting of activities. It's legal employment with clear boundaries, Eleanor corrected. Every condition relates directly to legitimate business concerns following your misconduct. You're free to decline. And go to jail instead? Olivia's voice cracked. This is monstrous. No, I replied evenly. What was monstrous was moving into my home while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. What was monstrous was attempting to erase 2 centuries of Montgomery history for your design portfolio. What was monstrous was believing you could replace me in my own life. The truth of my words seemed to finally reach her. She stared at the contract, then at me, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. You're not doing this out of revenge, she said slowly. You're doing it because Rosewood deserves restoration. I finished for her. The gardens you helped destroy represent 5 generations of Montgomery women's vision. You will help rebuild what you damaged, Ms. Winters. And perhaps, in the process, you'll understand the difference between decoration and legacy. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of choices and consequences. Finally, Olivia reached for the pen. 3 years, she said quietly. And then I'm free of all this? Provided you fulfill every condition, yes, your debt will be considered paid. I watched as she signed her name, this time with more resolution than fear. You'll report to Mrs. Simmons tomorrow morning at 7. She'll show you to your quarters. And Richard? She asked, a trace of her earlier attachment still evident. What happened to him? I reclaimed the signed contract, handing it to Eleanor for safekeeping. That conversation is about to happen. Marcus will escort you to collect essential personal items only from the main house. Everything else must be removed from the property by tomorrow evening. As Marcus led a subdued Olivia from the room, Eleanor turned to me with reluctant admiration. That was formidable, Catherine. Are you certain about this arrangement? Absolutely, I replied, checking the time. Olivia Winters is talented but misguided. She'll serve Rosewood better as a humbled gardener than as a prosecuted designer, and the psychological impact of having her on the property is precisely the point. I straightened in my wheelchair. Every day she spends restoring what she helped destroy is a reminder that actions have consequences. For her, for Richard, and for anyone who might consider threatening Rosewood in the future. Eleanor nodded slowly. Speaking of Richard, the auditors report he's becoming increasingly agitated. Apparently, he's tried calling Olivia several times without success. Good, let him worry. I checked my appearance in the small mirror Martha had thoughtfully provided. Please ask Marcus to inform Richard that his wife has returned home and requests his immediate presence in the morning room. As Eleanor left to deliver the message, Sophia approached with concern. Ms. Montgomery, your vital signs indicate significant stress. Perhaps we should delay the next confrontation. Not a chance, I replied, my voice steady despite the pain flaring through my body. Some conversations can't wait. The stage was set for Richard's arrival. The first piece of my strategy, neutralizing Olivia's influence and turning her into an asset rather than a liability, had been executed perfectly. Now came the more complex task, confronting the husband who had betrayed not just our marriage, but the legacy I had entrusted to his care. Richard entered the morning room like a man walking to his own execution, stiff-backed, pale-faced, with the desperate composure of someone whose world is collapsing but who refuses to acknowledge it. He stopped abruptly upon seeing me, his rehearsed greeting dying on his lips. "Catherine," he finally managed, his voice a mixture of shock and forced pleasure. "This is unexpected. The hospital didn't inform me you were being released." "I wasn't released," I replied calmly. "This is a temporary visit, though it has been most educational." His eyes darted around the room, taking in Eleanor's presence, the tea service, the conspicuous absence of Olivia. "You should have told me. I would have prepared properly, made sure everything was ready for you." "Everything appears quite prepared, Richard, just not in the way I would have expected." I gestured to the chair Olivia had recently vacated. "Please, sit. We have matters to discuss." He hesitated, clearly calculating his options. "Catherine, I know this must seem—" "Sit," I repeated, my tone brooking no argument. He complied, perching on the edge of the chair as Olivia had done, his usual confidence evaporating under my steady gaze. "How much do you know?" he asked after a moment of tense silence. "Everything," I replied simply. "The unauthorized renovations, the misappropriated funds, the dismissed staff, the parties in my dining room. Olivia wearing my grandmother's jewelry. Shall I continue?" His face contorted briefly before he regained control. "I can explain. After your accident, I was devastated. Lost. Olivia was just helping with estate matters at first. Her design expertise was valuable for some projects I'd already discussed with you. One thing led to another, but I never intended to get caught," I supplied. "To have me wake up and discover you'd moved your mistress into my family home and begun systematically erasing Montgomery history?" He flinched at my directness. "It wasn't like that." "No? Then explain the missing silver, the relocated paintings. The furniture was sold without authorization." "Temporary storage during renovations," he attempted. "Nothing was permanently storage at Pinnacle Auctions?" I interrupted, referencing the high-end auction house that specialized in historical estate liquidations. "With reserve prices already set? Marcus retrieved the consignment documents this morning, Richard. Your signature is on every page." The color drained from his face. This was clearly something he hadn't expected me to discover so quickly. "Financial necessity," he tried again. "The estate's operating costs during your absence have been fully funded through the trust," Eleanor interjected, opening a financial portfolio. "In fact, Rosewood's accounts show approximately $430,000 in unaccounted withdrawals since Ms. Montgomery's accident, yet no corresponding expenses in the official ledgers." Richard's composure cracked further. "This is all a misunderstanding. If you'd just let me explain properly—" "I've already heard Olivia's explanation," I said quietly. His head snapped up. "Olivia? She's been here?" "She just left." I maintained eye contact, watching the realization dawn. "We had a most illuminating conversation about your reassurances regarding my condition and your authority over Rosewood. Whatever she told you is corroborated by documentation, security footage, and witness statements," I finished for him. "Your position is untenable, Richard. The only question remaining is how we proceed from here." His expression shifted. Then, the panicked defensiveness giving way to something colder, more calculated, a glimpse of the true Richard beneath the charming facade I had married. "Let's be realistic, Catherine. You've just woken from a coma. You're still heavily medicated, clearly emotional about changes that were planned before your accident. Do you really want to create a public scandal? Think about what that would do to Rosewood's reputation, to the Montgomery name. There it was, the subtle threat, the attempt to use my devotion to Rosewood against me. 10 years ago it might have worked, but not today. Interesting you should mention Rosewood's reputation, I said, nodding to Eleanor, who produced the visitor logs. These show 17 unauthorized events hosted during my absence, including 3 where attendees toured private family areas, normally restricted to the public. One particularly enlightening entry indicates you allowed photography in the family vault, something expressly prohibited by the historical preservation easement. Richard's attempted intimidation faltered. Catherine, be reasonable. I maintained Rosewood's operations while you were incapacitated. Made necessary decisions to keep things running. Any missteps were made with the estate's best interests at heart, like hiring Olivia at an exorbitant rate, like dismissing staff whose families have served Rosewood for generations, like removing historical artifacts that have been in my family for 2 centuries. My voice remained level, though it took considerable effort. Which of those actions served Rosewood's best interests, Richard? He leaned forward, switching tactics. I made mistakes. I admit that. The stress of nearly losing you, the pressure of maintaining everything alone. It affected my judgment. But we can fix this, together. Once you're fully recovered, our marriage is over, I stated calmly. That's not negotiable. The finality in my tone seemed to penetrate at last. He sat back, his expression hardening. I see. And my position at Rosewood? Also terminated, effective immediately. You can't do that, he said, though without conviction. My contract includes a morality clause and fiduciary responsibility requirements, Eleanor interjected, both of which you violated extensively. The Board of Trustees has already approved your removal pending this conversation. Richard's breathing quickened, the first sign of genuine panic. And what am I supposed to do? You can't just erase 10 years of my life, my career, Your options, I interrupted, are outlined here. I gestured to the document Eleanor placed before him. Option 1. Contested termination, resulting in immediate removal from Rosewood. Property, forfeiture of all benefits, and public legal proceedings regarding misappropriation of estate resources. He scanned the document, his expression darkening. And option 2? A managed transition. You resign voluntarily, citing personal reasons. You return all misappropriated funds and items within 7 days. You maintain complete silence regarding our private affairs. In exchange, you receive a modest severance and neutral professional references. His laugh was bitter. That's your idea of generosity? After 10 years of marriage? My generosity, I replied evenly, is not pressing criminal charges for theft and fraud. The security footage alone would be compelling evidence. The threat hung between us, its implications clear. Richard's expressions cycled through anger, calculation, and finally, defeat. You've thought of everything, haven't you? He said, his voice hollow. The perfect Montgomery response, cold, calculated, dignified even in betrayal. Not everything, I admitted, surprising both of us with my candor. I never thought you capable of this level of betrayal. That was my mistake. One I won't repeat. Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or simply recognition of a battle decisively lost. What about my personal belongings? Marcus will supervise while you collect essential items today. The rest will be packed and delivered to an address of your choosing once inventory verification is complete. And Olivia? He asked, an edge of desperation entering his voice. Where is she now? I studied him carefully. Ms. Winters has made her own arrangements regarding her future. I suggest you do the same, separately. His eyes widened. What did you do to her? I offered her a choice, I replied simply. Just as I'm offering you one now. The silence stretched between us, heavy with a decade of shared history now irreparably fractured. Finally, Richard reached for the pen, signing the resignation agreement with a quick, angry stroke. "This isn't over, Catherine," he said, pushing the document toward Eleanor. "You may control Rosewood, but you can't control everything." "I don't need to control everything," I responded calmly. "Just what matters most." As Marcus appeared to escort Richard to collect his belongings, I remained perfectly composed. Only after the door closed behind them did I allow myself a moment of vulnerability, closing my eyes briefly against the wave of exhaustion and pain washing over me. "Catherine?" Eleanor's concerned voice brought me back to the present. "Do you need to rest?" "Not yet," I replied, opening my eyes. "The hardest parts are complete, but we still have work to do before I return to the hospital." She nodded, understanding as always. "The board is standing by for your call, and Gerald has prepared the staff announcement as requested." "Perfect. Let's proceed." I straightened in my wheelchair, pushing aside physical discomfort in favor of completing the day's objectives. "Martha?" The housekeeper appeared from where she had been discreetly waiting. "Yes, Miss Catherine?" "Please begin a comprehensive inventory of what needs to be restored or replaced. Prioritize the family apartments and historical collections." "Right. Away." She nodded, visibly relieved to be taking action. "And the changes they made?" "Document everything, but don't begin reversing them yet. Some may need professional conservation work." As Martha departed to begin the mammoth task of cataloging the damage, I turned to Eleanor. "What's Richard's demeanor?" According to Marcus's text, angry but compliant. He's collecting personal items from his office now, under supervision. I nodded, unsurprised. "And Olivia?" "Has been escorted to the staff quarters to await further instructions tomorrow. She appears subdued, as she should be." I glanced at the ornate clock on the mantelpiece, a Montgomery heirloom that had somehow escaped the purge. "We have approximately 90 minutes before I must return to the hospital. Let's use them wisely." What followed was a carefully orchestrated series of calls and conferences, first with the Board of Trustees, confirming Richard's resignation and my interim management plan during recovery, then with Gerald and the department heads, outlining immediate priorities and staffing adjustments. Finally, with the estate's conservator, arranging emergency assessment of damaged historical items. Throughout it all, I maintained the composed, strategic demeanor expected of a Montgomery in crisis. Only Sophia, monitoring my vital signs with increasing concern, understood the physical toll this was taking. "Ms. Montgomery," she finally intervened as I concluded the last call, "we need to prepare for your return to the hospital. Your pain levels and blood pressure indicate you've reached your physical limits." I nodded, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. "Just one more thing, Eleanor. The press statement?" "Drafted as requested," she confirmed, displaying the document on her tablet. Simple, dignified, and entirely devoid of scandal. I reviewed the carefully worded announcement that would inform the public of Richard's departure and my continued recovery, finding it appropriately restrained. Perfect. Release. It tomorrow morning after Richard has vacated the property. As the medical transport team arrived to return me to the hospital, I took a final look around the morning room. This small corner of Rosewood still intact, still authentically Montgomery. Despite the pain, despite the betrayal, a sense of quiet, satisfaction settled over me. In just 4 hours, I had reclaimed my home, neutralized threats to my family legacy, and set in motion the restoration of all that mattered most. "Catherine," Eleanor said quietly as the transport team prepared the wheelchair, "what you accomplished today was remarkable." "It was necessary," I replied simply. "Rosewood has survived worse crises over 2 centuries. It will survive this one, too." What I didn't add, what I kept closely guarded even from Eleanor, was that my work wasn't yet complete. Richard and Olivia had been addressed, but the vulnerability they had exploited remained. As long as I was physically compromised, Rosewood remained at risk. The next phase of my strategy would have to wait until I returned permanently, stronger, fully recovered, and ready to implement the most significant restructuring in Rosewood's recent history. For now, I had won the immediate battle. The war for Rosewood's future, however, was just beginning. 2 weeks after my surprise visit to Rosewood, I was discharged from the hospital to the rehabilitation center. My recovery continued to exceed medical expectations, driven by a determination that surprised even my physical therapists. Every painful step, every grueling exercise brought me closer to returning home permanently. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Dr. Hayes cautioned during her weekly assessment. "Recovery isn't a race, Ms. Montgomery." "Perhaps not for most people," I replied, completing another set of exercises despite the burning pain in my leg. "But I have an estate to run and a legacy to protect." From my room at the rehabilitation center, I maintained constant communication with Eleanor, Marcus, and Martha, orchestrating Rosewood's operations with the same attention to detail I'd always employed. Richard had vacated the property the evening of our confrontation, taking only personal items and leaving behind a decade of memories and betrayal. Olivia had dutifully reported to Martha the following morning, beginning her 3-year commitment to restoring the gardens she had helped destroy. The press release announcing Richard's departure had been masterfully crafted, citing his desire to pursue independent architectural opportunities following my inspiring progress toward recovery. No hint of scandal, no suggestion of impropriety. The Montgomery way had always been to handle crises with dignity and discretion. Yet rumors inevitably circulated within the tight-knit community of historical estate management. Eleanor reported whispers at board meetings, questions from long-time clients, concerned inquiries from the Historical Preservation Society. Everyone sensed something significant had changed at Rosewood, though few knew the full extent. "Richard has been making discreet inquiries about breaking the non-disclosure agreement," Eleanor informed me during one of our daily strategy calls, "testing the waters with industry contacts about sharing his experiences at Rosewood." "As I expected," I replied, reviewing the financial recovery reports on my tablet. "Has he approached any specific media outlets?" "Not yet. Just vague conversations about telling his side at some point. Nothing actionable." "Monitor it closely. The moment he crosses the line, we'll enforce the penalties." I shifted topics to more immediate concerns. "How is the inventory recovery progressing?" Eleanor's expression brightened. "Better than anticipated." Marcus tracked down the auction house shipments, and we've recovered approximately 70% of the removed items. The remaining pieces are being traced through secondary dealers. "And the renovations?" "The Historical Preservation Team has begun assessment. Most changes can be reversed without permanent damage, though the painted silk wallpaper in your bedroom will require specialized restoration. The conservator estimates 6 to 8 months for complete historical recovery." I nodded, making notes in my recovery journal, a habit I'd developed during rehabilitation, tracking both my physical progress and Rosewood's restoration simultaneously. The parallel healing processes provided a strange symmetry that I found oddly comforting. "And our new groundskeeper?" I asked the question deliberately casually. Eleanor's lips twitched with the ghost of a smile. "Ms. Winters appears to be adapting to her position remarkably. Humility. Martha reports she hasn't complained once, despite being assigned to the Rose Garden restoration, which requires removing all the modernist sculptures she installed and replanting according to your mother's original designs. Appropriate consequences," I murmured. "And the staff's response to her presence?" Initially confused, now guardedly accepting. "Your message that she's working off her debt to Rosewood was well received, particularly by those who witnessed the changes during your absence. They appreciate poetic justice." Our conversation was interrupted by my physical therapist arriving for the afternoon session. After Eleanor departed, I threw myself into the grueling exercises with renewed determination. Each painful movement brought me closer to independence, to returning home, to implementing the next phase of my strategy. That evening, as I reviewed the day's reports from Rosewood, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Assuming it was a hospital administrative call, I answered without hesitation. Catherine Montgomery speaking. Silence stretched for a moment before a familiar voice responded. Catherine, you're a difficult woman to reach these days. Richard. My pulse quickened, though my voice remained perfectly steady. I'm rather occupied with recovering from near-fatal injuries. What do you want? To talk, he replied, his tone carefully modulated to project reasonableness. What happened at Rosewood? It wasn't my finest moment. I acknowledge that. But 10 years of marriage deserves better than a 30-minute confrontation and a forced resignation. You had 10 years to demonstrate your commitment to our marriage, I responded evenly. You chose instead to move your mistress into my family home while I was in a coma. I believe that establishes the value you placed on our relationship. His frustrated sigh carried through the connection. People make mistakes, Catherine, especially under extreme stress. You nearly died. Do you understand what that did to me? How terrified I was of losing you, of being alone. So terrified you sought comfort in another woman's arms? So devastated you began selling my family heirlooms? The ice in my voice could have frozen the entire eastern seaboard. Your narrative needs considerable work, Richard. This isn't about narratives, he insisted. It's about being fair. The separation agreement you forced on me, it's draconian. 10 years of my professional life erased, my reputation in the historical architecture community damaged, my financial security compromised. I deserve better. Ah, there it was. The real purpose of his call. Your current circumstances are the direct result of your own actions, I stated calmly. The agreement you signed was entirely fair given the extent of your betrayal, both personal and professional. I disagree, he replied, a harder edge entering his voice. And I'm not alone in that assessment. My attorney believes there are substantial grounds to challenge the agreement, particularly given your medical condition at the time. I allowed myself a small smile, though he couldn't see it. You're welcome to pursue that avenue, of course, though I should mention that any litigation would necessitate making public the full details of your conduct during my hospitalization. The security footage alone would be quite compelling evidence. Silence again, longer this time. Richard had always been calculating, weighing risks against potential rewards. It was one of the qualities that had made him an effective architectural director and apparently an accomplished deceiver. It doesn't have to be adversarial, he finally said, his tone softening. I still care about you, Catherine. About Rosewood. There must be a middle ground where we can both move forward with dignity. I'm already moving forward, I replied. Rosewood is being restored, operations are stabilizing, and my recovery progresses daily. Your presence isn't required for any of it. And Olivia? He asked suddenly. What have you done with her? She won't answer my calls, and her design business seems to have vanished overnight. I considered how much to reveal. Ms. Winters has agreed to make amends for her role in damaging Rosewood. The specifics are between her and me. You can't just control people like this. Richard's frustration bubbled through. You can't dictate everyone's lives according to your Montgomery standards of proper conduct. I'm not controlling anyone, I corrected him. I'm simply establishing appropriate consequences for those who chose to violate my trust and damage my family's legacy. You and Ms. Winters made your decisions freely. Now you're experiencing the natural results. His bitter laugh carried through the phone. Natural? There's nothing natural about how calculating you are, Catherine. Even from a hospital bed, you managed to orchestrate this entire scenario with terrifying precision. Do you even feel anything about what happened between us? Or is it all just strategic moves on your Montgomery chessboard? The question struck closer to home than I cared to admit. I had deliberately compartmentalized my emotional response to his betrayal, focusing instead on the practical aspects of recovery, both mine and Rosewood's. The personal pain remained carefully contained, a luxury I couldn't afford until more pressing matters were resolved. My feelings are irrelevant to this conversation, I finally replied. What matters is that you abided by our agreement. Any attempt to challenge it will be met with immediate legal action and public disclosure of your conduct. Always the Ice Queen, he muttered. Fine. Keep your precious estate and your dignity. But remember this, Catherine. You may have won this round, but you've made it abundantly clear that Rosewood is your only true love. And that legacy you're so desperate to protect? It's going to keep you very warm at night for the next 40 years. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the silent phone. Despite my outward composure, Richard's parting shot had found its mark. The Montgomery legacy had always been my primary responsibility, a duty I had accepted without question. But in the quiet moments between strategic planning and physical therapy, I sometimes wondered about the personal cost of that devotion. I pushed the thought aside, returning to the estate reports awaiting my review. Richard's call had been predictable, a test of my resolve, an attempt to gauge whether my medical condition might make me vulnerable to emotional manipulation. His failure to secure any concessions would likely accelerate his next move, whatever that might be. I made a note to inform Eleanor about the conversation, then returned to planning my most significant counter-move yet, the complete restructuring of Rosewood's management structure to prevent any future vulnerability during my absence. The Board of Trustees had already approved my preliminary proposal to create a more distributed leadership model, with clear checks and balances to protect against individual overreach. By the time I returned to Rosewood permanently, the new organizational framework would be ready for implementation, a legacy protection system that would ensure the Montgomery estate remained secure regardless of my personal circumstances. As I worked late into the night, refining the details of department realignments and authority boundaries, I found myself occasionally glancing at the framed photograph of Rosewood that Eleanor had brought to brighten my rehabilitation room. The estate stood proud against the Virginia sky, 2 centuries of Montgomery stewardship embodied in its elegant Georgian lines. What Richard had never understood, what Olivia had failed to appreciate in her modernization frenzy, was that Rosewood wasn't merely a beautiful property to be redesigned according to current trends. It was a living historical record, each careful preservation decision a continuation of a story that began long before any of us and would continue long after we were gone. My defense of that legacy wasn't just about maintaining family ownership or preserving antique furniture. It was about honoring a continuum of responsibility that had been entrusted to me, a sacred obligation that transcended personal happiness or comfort. If that made me an ice queen in Richard's estimation, so be it. The Montgomery women had never required outside validation for doing what was necessary to protect what mattered most. 3 months after my accident, I finally returned home to Rosewood. The medical team had advised against it, arguing that my rehabilitation would progress more efficiently in their controlled environment. But I had reached the limit of my patience with institutional living. Rosewood needed me, and I needed Rosewood. My homecoming was deliberately understated. No press, no announcements, just a quiet arrival on a crisp autumn morning. The estate's maple trees ablaze with color against a cloudless sky. Martha, Marcus, and Eleanor waited on the front steps as the car pulled up the long driveway. "Welcome home, Ms. Montgomery," Martha said, her eyes glistening as Marcus helped me from the car. I was walking now, albeit with a cane and considerably slower than before. "Thank you, Martha." I took a moment to survey the facade of my ancestral home, noting with approval that the unauthorized modern sculptures had been removed from the entrance. "It appears considerable progress has been made." "The restoration teams have been working around the clock," Eleanor confirmed, falling into step beside me as we slowly ascended the stairs. The public areas are almost completely returned to their original state. The private wing will take longer, but it's livable. Inside, the entry hall had been restored to its proper dignity. Montgomery family portraits once again adorning the kai. Walls, the antique console table returned to its rightful place. The air carried the familiar scent of beeswax polish and fresh flowers, erasing all traces of Olivia's designer fragrances. Despite my determination to appear strong, I couldn't help but lean more heavily on my cane as we toured the main floor. The physical exertion combined with the emotional weight of seeing the damage and restoration in progress left me drained. "Perhaps we should continue tomorrow," Eleanor suggested gently, noting my fatigue. "Your home health nurse has prepared. You're sweet, and Martha has arranged a light lunch." I nodded, conceding to physical necessity. "One more stop first. I'd like to see the rose garden." They exchanged glances, but didn't argue. Marcus offered his arm for additional support as we made our way through the terrace doors and onto the stone path, leading to my mother's beloved rose garden. And there she was. Olivia Winters, dressed in standard rosewood groundskeeper attire, khaki, pants, forest green polo shirt, mud-stained gloves, was on her knees beside a freshly turned bed of soil, painstakingly planting what appeared to be heritage rose bushes. Her copper hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her designer clothes replaced by practical workwear, her flawlessly manicured nails now rimmed with dirt. She didn't notice our approach at first, too focused on following the planting diagram spread on the ground beside her. When Marcus deliberately cleared his throat, she looked up, her expression cycling rapidly from surprise to embarrassment to carefully composed neutrality. "Ms. Montgomery," she acknowledged, rising quickly and removing her gloves. "Welcome home." I studied her carefully, noting the changes 3 months had wrought. The polished interior designer who had so confidently redecorated my ancestral home was gone, replaced by a humbled woman whose sunburned nose and calloused hands spoke of honest labor. "Ms. Winters," I replied with a slight nod. "I see you're working on the Madame Berkeley section." A flicker of surprise crossed her features, perhaps at my knowledge of the garden's layout, or perhaps at my civil tone. "Yes, according to your mother's planting diagrams. This section should contain 12 heritage varieties in a star pattern, centered around the sundial. 14 varieties, I corrected gently. The diagram doesn't show the Lady Emma Hamiltons that should flank the entrance to the trellised walkway. My mother added those the year before her death. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. "I'll adjust the planting plan accordingly." "See that you do." I glanced around the garden, noting areas of progress and sections still awaiting restoration. "I'll be conducting weekly inspections of the restoration work. I expect precise adherence to the historical plans." Of course. Her eyes met mine, briefly, and I detected something unexpected. Not resentment or anger, but a glimmer of genuine respect. "The restoration team has been most helpful in providing detailed documentation." "Good." I turned to leave, then paused. "Has the work been educational, Ms. Winters?" She didn't pretend to misunderstand my meaning. "Very. I've learned that creating something of lasting value is considerably more difficult than designing for temporary aesthetic appeal. These gardens have survived for generations because they were planted with purpose and maintained with devotion." I nodded, satisfied with her response. "Continue your work. Martha will inform you of the inspection schedule." As we made our way back toward the house, Eleanor raised an eyebrow. That was remarkably civil. "Why wouldn't it be?" I replied. "Ms. Winters is fulfilling her contractual obligations, apparently with appropriate diligence. Professional courtesy costs nothing." "And Richard?" Marcus asked carefully. "He's made several attempts to gain access to the property since your confrontation. Claims he left important personal documents in the South Office. Any essential items should have been collected during his supervised removal," I replied firmly. If he provides a specific list, you may search for the items and forward them, after thorough review to ensure they aren't estate property. Under no circumstances is he to enter Rosewood grounds. The next week passed in a carefully structured rhythm of recovery, physical therapy in the mornings, estate management in the afternoons, restoration planning in the evenings. My home health nurse monitored my progress with professional diligence, while Martha ensured I didn't overextend myself. Eleanor and Marcus provided daily updates on operational matters, often working late into the night in my private study. The Board of Trustees convened a special meeting to formally welcome me home and review my proposed restructuring plan. Their unanimous approval gave me the authority to implement sweeping changes to Rosewood's management structure, creating clear divisions between operational areas, establishing multiple oversight mechanisms, and ensuring no single person could ever again wield the kind of unchecked influence Richard had accumulated. It's a brilliant system, Victoria Lockwood, the board's most senior member, commented after reviewing the final framework. The distributed authority model provides security without sacrificing efficiency. Rosewood will be better protected than ever before. That's the intention, I confirmed. The Montgomery legacy deserves nothing less. And speaking of legacy, Victoria continued, her tone softening. How are you, Catherine? Not the estate manager, not the Montgomery heir. You, personally? The question caught me off guard. Few people in my life distinguished between my role and my identity. Fewer still dared to ask about my personal well-being. I'm recovering, I finally replied. Physically, medically, operationally. Victoria's knowing gaze held mine. And emotionally? I looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. That's less relevant to Rosewood's interests. Is it? She leaned forward slightly. The Montgomery women have always been formidable guardians of this estate, precisely because they brought their whole selves to the task, not just strategic minds, but passionate hearts. Your mother understood this. She loved this place fiercely, but she also loved your father, loved you, loved life beyond these walls. Memories of my mother, laughing as she taught me to deadhead roses, dancing with my father in the grand hall after charity events, passionately defending historical authenticity. At preservation board meetings, rose unbidden in my mind. The circumstances are different, I said quietly. My mother had a partner worthy of her trust. Victoria nodded slowly. Richard's betrayal was unconscionable. But don't let it define your future, Catherine. Rosewood has always been about continuity, not just preserving the past, but ensuring a vibrant future. After she left, I remained in my study, contemplating her words. The Montgomery legacy wasn't merely about maintaining buildings and grounds. It was about sustaining a living heritage that evolved with each generation while honoring those that came before. My mother had understood this intrinsically, finding balance between tradition and innovation, between duty and joy. My reflections were interrupted by Martha, who entered with the nervous demeanor that always signaled unwelcome news. Ms. Catherine, I'm sorry to disturb you, but Mr. Harrington is at the main gate. He's demanding to speak with you and says it's urgent regarding legal matters that can't wait. I sighed, having anticipated this confrontation since my return. How is his demeanor? Agitated, Martha replied. Marcus has security standing by, but Mr. Harrington is threatening to call the police if he's not allowed entry. Claims he has legal rights as your husband. Former husband, I corrected, though our divorce wasn't yet finalized. Tell Marcus I'll see him, but only in the formal parlor, with security present in the adjoining room, and for no more than 15 minutes. As Martha left to relay my instructions, I moved to the window overlooking the front drive. Within minutes, Richard's sleek black car approached the house, stopping with a spray of gravel that spoke of his agitation. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his posture as he emerged, straightening his designer suit, always image-conscious, even in crisis. I took a moment to compose myself, checking my appearance in the antique mirror above the fireplace. 3 months of rehabilitation had restored much of my physical strength, though I still relied on the cane for longer walks. My face remained thinner than before the accident, lending my features a more angular quality that accentuated the Montgomery bone structure I'd inherited from my grandmother. With deliberate calm, I made my way to the formal parlor, a room traditionally used for receiving important but not intimate acquaintances. By the time Richard was escorted in, I was seated in the high-backed chair that had always served as a subtle power position for Montgomery negotiations. "Catherine." He stopped just inside the doorway, his expression a carefully composed mask of concern. "You're looking well." "Thank you." "Martha mentioned there was an urgent legal matter?" I kept my tone businesslike, offering no opening for personal conversation. Richard's facade cracked slightly at my directness. "Always straight to business. No, how are you, or nice to see you, after 3 months. I believe we said everything necessary during our last encounter," I replied evenly. "Your 15 minutes are counting down, Richard. I suggest you use them productively." His jaw tightened. "Fine. I've received an offer from Grayson Media for exclusive rights to my story. My experiences at Rosewood, our marriage, the real truth behind the Montgomery legacy. They're prepared to offer a substantial advance for a tell-all book, with potential documentary options." So this was his play, threatening to violate the non-disclosure agreement unless I offered better terms. Predictable, if somewhat desperate. "How interesting," I replied, maintaining perfect composure. "And you've come to inform me that you'll be facing a significant lawsuit when you breach our agreement?" His smile was cold. "That's just it, Catherine. My new attorney believes our agreement won't hold up in court, not when it was signed under duress, while you were still recovering from severe injuries and I was under extreme emotional stress. We have an excellent case for invalidating the entire separation contract." I studied him for a moment, seeing beyond the confident exterior to the desperation beneath. Richard had always been skilled at projecting assurance, but certain tells betrayed him to those who knew where to look: the slight tension around his eyes, the barely perceptible tapping of his left index finger against his thigh. "Your new attorney should have advised you that threatening me is counterproductive," I observed calmly. "But since you've raised the issue, allow me to clarify your situation." I reached for the small silver bell on the side table, ringing it once. Almost immediately, Eleanor entered with a leather portfolio, having anticipated this moment since Richard's arrival was announced. "Perfect timing," I said, taking the portfolio from her. "Richard believes his non-disclosure agreement might be vulnerable to legal challenge. Perhaps you could enlighten him?" Eleanor's professional demeanor never wavered as she turned to Richard. "Mr. Harrington, your separation agreement was witnessed by 2 attorneys, signed in the presence of a notary, and executed after Ms. Montgomery's medical team certified her full cognitive competence. More importantly, it contains a cascade clause that you seem to have overlooked." Richard frowned. "Cascade clause?" I extracted a document from the portfolio and slid it across the coffee table toward him. Section 12, paragraph 3. In the event any portion of the agreement is invalidated by legal action, the remaining provisions are automatically strengthened, and additional penalties are triggered. He snatched up the document, scanning it with growing dismay. "This wasn't in the original agreement." "It was on page 17, Eleanor corrected, "which you signed, as confirmed by the initialed acknowledgement at the bottom of each page." I watched realization dawn across his features. "So if I challenge the non-disclosure, you potentially free yourself from confidentiality obligations," I confirmed, while simultaneously activating the accelerated financial penalties, property forfeitures, and professional restrictions outlined in Appendix C. A Pyrrhic victory at best. Richard's confidence crumbled visibly. He had clearly been counting on my fear of public scandal to force concessions, not realizing I had anticipated this move months ago when drafting the original agreement. "This is unconscionable," he finally managed, his voice tight with frustration. "You've backed me into a corner where I have no recourse, no options." "On the contrary, you have exactly the options you agreed to when you signed the separation documents." I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "Your choices remain the same. Honor your commitments and move forward with the generous settlement provided, or violate our agreement and face substantially more severe consequences." "Generous?" He laughed bitterly. "You've effectively blacklisted me from every major historical preservation project on the East Coast. My reputation remains intact," I interrupted smoothly. "The official announcement cited personal reasons for your departure. Any damage to your professional standing has been entirely self-inflicted through your subsequent behavior." He stared at me, a conflicting mixture of anger and grudging respect crossing his features. "You really did think of everything, didn't you?" "Not everything," I admitted. "I never anticipated needing such comprehensive protections against someone I once trusted completely. That was my mistake. One I won't repeat." The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the quarter hour, signaling the end of our allotted time. Richard glanced toward the sound, then back at me, something shifting in his expression. "What happened to you, Catherine? The woman I married would never have been this calculating, this cold." "The woman you married trusted you to honor your vows and protect her legacy," I replied quietly. "She learned otherwise while fighting for her life in a hospital bed. The woman before you now is simply better equipped to recognize betrayal before it can cause irreparable damage." Martha appeared in the doorway, a silent reminder that our meeting had reached its conclusion. Richard rose slowly, reluctance evident in every movement. "This isn't how our story should have ended," he said, a final attempt at emotional manipulation. "Our story ended the moment you moved another woman into my family home," I replied simply. "Everything since has merely been epilogue." After he departed, Eleanor remained, her expression concerned. "He won't give up easily, Catherine. Men like Richard, when cornered, often become unpredictable." "I'm counting on it," I replied, surprising her. "His predictability has been his greatest weakness throughout this ordeal. Each move exactly as anticipated, each reaction precisely as expected. It's almost disappointing how conventional his betrayal has proven to be." Eleanor studied me carefully. "You wanted him to threaten the non-disclosure agreement." "I expected it," I corrected. It was the logical next step for someone of his character when faced with financial constraints and damaged pride. Now that he's played that card and found it ineffective, he'll be forced to either accept his circumstances or escalate dramatically. And if he escalates? I smiled thinly. Then the contingency plans in Section 15 will become relevant. The following day, I summoned Gerald, Rosewood's longtime events coordinator, to my study. His nervous demeanor suggested he anticipated criticism for his performance during my absence. "Gerald," I began, gesturing for him to take a seat. "I've reviewed the event records from the past 4 months. You've maintained our professional bookings admirably under difficult circumstances." Relief flooded his features. "Thank you, Ms. Montgomery. I tried to uphold Rosewood standards despite complications." "Those complications are precisely why I've asked to meet with you today." I slid a folder across my desk. "This contains the new organizational structure for Rosewood's events division. Effective immediately, you'll be promoted to Director of Heritage Events, with expanded authority and 3 new staff members reporting directly to you." Gerald's eyes widened as he reviewed the documents. This is a significant expansion of my responsibilities. And compensation," I noted. "The role includes a 30% salary increase and discretionary budget for staff development." "I'm honored, but May I ask why now? I leaned forward slightly. Because Rosewood's future security depends on distributing authority among loyal, long-term staff who understand the Montgomery legacy. Your 15 years of service have demonstrated your commitment to our standards and traditions. Similar conversations played out across Rosewood over the next 2 weeks as I systematically restructured every department, elevating dedicated employees, creating clear chains of command with built-in oversight mechanisms, and establishing a management council that would meet weekly to coordinate across divisions. The restructuring wasn't merely organizational, it was foundational. Each change served dual purposes: recognizing loyal staff who had protected Rosewood's interests during my absence, while simultaneously ensuring no individual could ever again accumulate the unchecked influence Richard had wielded. By month's end, Rosewood operated under an entirely new management framework, one designed to withstand any future crisis, including potential periods when I might be unavailable. The Board of Trustees, impressed by the comprehensive nature of the changes, voted unanimously to codify the new structure in Rosewood's governing documents. "You've created a self-sustaining system," Victoria observed during our monthly review. "Rosewood is now institutionally protected against the kind of vulnerability that Richard exploited." That was the objective, I confirmed. The Montgomery legacy can't depend solely on any individual, even me. "Especially not you," Victoria countered gently. "This new structure doesn't just protect Rosewood from external threats, it liberates you from the burden of constant vigilance. For the first time since you inherited this responsibility, you have the freedom to focus on more than mere preservation." Her observation struck deeper than she likely intended. For 12 years since my parents' deaths, I had defined myself, primarily as Rosewood's caretaker, the latest in a long line of Montgomery stewards. Even my marriage to Richard had been in many ways an extension of that duty, bringing architectural expertise into the family to ensure Rosewood's physical structures received proper care. The accident, Richard's betrayal, and my subsequent restructuring of Rosewood's management had forced me to reconsider that singular focus. If my identity wasn't solely defined by my role as Rosewood's guardian, what else might it encompass? That question lingered as I conducted my weekly inspection of the restoration projects, eventually bringing me to the rose garden where Olivia was carefully pruning the heritage bushes according to traditional techniques taught by our master, gardener. She looked up as I approached, setting aside her shears and rising to meet me. 3 months of outdoor work had transformed her. Sun-kissed skin replacing her former salon pallor, practical clothes and sturdy boots supplanting designer outfits, honest soil beneath her nails instead of perfect manicures. "Ms. Montgomery," she greeted me with appropriate deference. "The Madame Berkeley section is complete, and we've begun preparation for the winter protection of the new plantings." I nodded, inspecting the work with a critical eye. To my surprise, the restoration was impeccable, each rose variety placed exactly according to my mother's original design, the paths restored with historical accuracy, the balance between structured formality and natural growth perfectly maintained. "You've been studying the historical photographs," I observed, noting details that couldn't have been captured in the written instructions alone. Olivia nodded. "The archival images from the 1950s were particularly helpful in understanding your grandmother's original vision. The symmetry between the eastern and western quadrants wasn't obvious from the planting diagrams." I studied her with renewed interest. "You've developed a genuine appreciation for historical authenticity." "I've learned that true design excellence requires understanding context and heritage," she admitted. "My previous work was superficial by comparison, trendy rather than timeless." An unexpected thought occurred to me, one that aligned with the systematic restructuring I'd been implementing throughout Rosewood. Every other department now had clear succession planning and distributed expertise. The gardens, however, remained vulnerable, with knowledge concentrated among aging staff members. How much longer on your contract, Ms. Winters? She straightened slightly. 2 years, 4 months, and 17 days. The precision of her answer suggested she was counting each one. And after that? What are your plans? Confusion flickered across her features. I haven't allowed myself to think that far ahead. My design business is finished as stipulated in our agreement. I nodded thoughtfully. Report to my office tomorrow at 9. Bring your observations on the historical authenticity of the perennial borders and any recommendations for improving our winter protection protocols. Before she could respond, I turned and continued my inspection tour, my mind already calculating the possibilities this unexpected development presented. Every crisis contained opportunity. My grandmother had taught me that lesson during the financial challenges of the 1970s, when Rosewood had nearly been lost to tax burdens. Richard's betrayal had forced me to reimagine Rosewood's entire management structure. Perhaps Olivia's redemption could serve a similar purpose in securing the garden's future, transforming a former threat into a permanent asset. The systematic restructuring of Rosewood wasn't just about preventing future betrayals. It was about building a stronger foundation for the next century of the Montgomery legacy. Each change, each promotion, each redistribution of authority served the estate's long-term interests while honoring its historical significance. As I completed my inspection rounds, ending at my mother's favorite viewpoint overlooking the entire property, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the accident. A sense of possibility rather than mere responsibility, of building rather than simply preserving. Rosewood was secure. The management restructuring had succeeded beyond my expectations. The restoration projects were progressing steadily. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to consider what might come next, not just for Rosewood, but for Catherine Montgomery, the woman who existed beyond her role as the estate's caretaker. 1 year after my accident, Rosewood Estate hosted its most significant event in decades, the Eastern Seaboard Historical Preservation Society's annual conference. 200 preservation experts, architectural historians, and estate managers from Maine to Georgia gathered to discuss heritage conservation challenges and celebrate exemplary stewardship of historical properties. The decision to host had been deliberate, a public declaration that Rosewood had not only survived its recent upheavals, but emerged stronger. The timing was strategic as well, coinciding with the completion of our major restoration projects and the 1-year anniversary of my return home. Everything is prepared, Eleanor reported as we conducted a final walk through the evening before guests arrived. The West Wing renovations were completed yesterday, the formal gardens are immaculate, and the staff rehearsals went flawlessly. Nodded, pleased with what I saw. The great hall gleamed with polished wood and brass, family portraits restored to their proper positions, antique furnishings arranged exactly as my ancestors had intended. No trace remained of Richard and Olivia's modernization attempts. Rosewood once again embodied the perfect balance of historical authenticity and timeless elegance that had been the Montgomery hallmark for generations. And the presentation materials for tomorrow's keynote? Finalized and approved, Eleanor confirmed. The before and after restoration documentation is particularly compelling. Several board members suggested it might merit publication in next year's preservation journal. We continued through the public areas, ensuring every detail met the exacting standards I had established. The conference would showcase not just Rosewood's physical beauty, but the innovative management model we had implemented, a case study in institutional resilience that had already drawn interest from historical properties across the country. In the East Garden, we encountered Olivia directing a small team of gardeners as they made final adjustments to the heritage rose displays. She had progressed from manual labor to supervisory responsibilities over the past months, her genuine talent for historical landscape preservation becoming increasingly evident. Ms. Montgomery, she acknowledged with professional courtesy. We're completing the special arrangements for tomorrow's garden tour. The heritage varieties are at peak bloom, exactly as planned. Excellent work, I replied, noting the precision with which the displays had been prepared. The conference attendees include several prominent garden historians. They'll appreciate the authenticity of the restoration. Olivia nodded, a hint of pride visible beneath her professional demeanor. We've prepared detailed documentation of the restoration process, including the archival research that guided our replanting decisions. It will be available during the specialized tours. As we continued our inspection, Eleanor gave voice to what I had been considering for months. Olivia has shown remarkable dedication to the historical accuracy of the garden restoration. Her knowledge of heritage varieties now rivals our senior horticulturists. Indeed, I agreed. Her transformation has been unexpected but valuable. Later that evening, as I reviewed my keynote address in the privacy of my study, I found myself reflecting on transformations of all kinds. Rosewood had transformed from a vulnerable institution dependent on a single leader to a robust organization with distributed expertise and authority. The physical estate had transformed from Richard and Olivia's modernist vision back to its authentic historical character, though with careful updates to ensure operational sustainability. But perhaps the most significant transformation had been my own. The Catherine Montgomery who had driven to Rosewood on that rainy day 16 months ago, focused solely on expanding the estate's event offerings, confident in her marriage, secure in her understanding of her role, was gone. The accident, Richard's betrayal, and the long journey of recovery had forged someone different, someone more strategic, more circumspect about trust, but also, surprisingly, more open to possibility. A knock on my study door interrupted these reflections. Martha entered, her expression suggesting something unexpected had occurred. "Ms. Catherine, I apologize for the interruption, but there's someone asking to see you. Dr. James Kendrick from the National Historical Registry. He's not on the early arrival list for the conference, but he insists it's important." The name was vaguely familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. Did he state his business? Only that it concerns Rosewood's historical designation status and can't wait until tomorrow's formal proceedings. Curious, I agreed to see him in the small reception room. A few minutes later, Martha showed in a distinguished-looking man in his early 50s with silver streaks, dark hair, and intelligent eyes behind classic tortoiseshell glasses. "Ms. Montgomery," he greeted me with a warm handshake. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I apologize for the unorthodox timing, but I wanted to speak with you privately before tomorrow's public sessions." "Dr. Kendrick," I acknowledged, gesturing for him to sit. "I confess your name seems familiar, though I don't believe we've met." "We haven't," he confirmed with a smile, "though we corresponded briefly after your parents' passing. I was working with your father on the expanded historical designation for Rosewood's agricultural outbuildings." The connection clicked into place. "Of course. The preservation of the original tobacco drying barns. My father mentioned your work before their final trip." A shadow of sympathy crossed his features. "Your father was a visionary in historical preservation. His commitment to authenticating agricultural practices alongside the more traditionally valued main house elements was revolutionary at the time." "Thank you. I studied him more carefully. But I suspect you didn't seek a private meeting to discuss past preservation projects." His smile deepened, appreciation for directness evident in his expression. "Indeed not. I'm here because the National Registry has been monitoring Rosewood's recent challenges and responses with great interest. The comprehensive restoration you've undertaken following the unauthorized changes represents a case study in historical recovery that we consider exemplary." I raised an eyebrow. "The registry has been monitoring Rosewood?" "We monitor all Category A historical properties, Ms. Montgomery, particularly when ownership or management changes might affect preservation status." He paused delicately. Your accident and subsequent absence created certain vulnerabilities that raised concerns among preservation authorities. I see. I maintained my composed expression, though inwardly I noted how widespread the awareness of Rosewood's crisis had been. And you found our recovery efforts satisfactory? Far more than satisfactory, he replied with unexpected enthusiasm. Your systematic approach to restoration, the comprehensive documentation of both damage and recovery processes, and particularly your innovative restructuring of management responsibilities to prevent future vulnerability, they've established a new gold standard for heritage estate resilience. The conversation continued, revealing that Dr. Kendrick had come with a specific purpose: to invite Rosewood to participate in an elite pilot program for enhanced historical designation, one that would include substantial federal grant funding for continued preservation efforts. Only 5 properties along the eastern seaboard have been selected, he explained. The program represents a fundamental shift in how we approach historical preservation, moving from static conservation to dynamic stewardship models. Rosewood's recent experience makes it uniquely qualified to help develop these new standards. By the time he departed an hour later, we had established the framework for Rosewood's participation in the program, a professional validation of everything we had accomplished during the recovery process. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, coming on the eve of the preservation conference where Rosewood would showcase its transformation to the broader historical community. As Martha showed Dr. Kendrick out, Eleanor knocked and entered, curiosity evident in her expression. Good news, judging by your expression. The registry is supporting our restoration approach? More than supporting, I replied, handing her Dr. Kendrick's proposal. They're featuring Rosewood as a model for institutional resilience in historical properties. The grant funding alone will secure our specialized restoration projects for the next 5 years. Eleanor scanned the document, her eyes widening. Catherine, this is extraordinary. Everything you've built here, the management restructuring, the restoration priorities, the documentation protocols, it's being recognized as pioneering work in the field. Not just my work, I corrected her. This represents the contributions of everyone who helped Rosewood recover. You, Marcus, Martha, the entire staff who maintained standards during my absence and worked tirelessly during the restoration. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself drawn to the antique secretary desk in my bedroom where I kept my most personal correspondence. In the top drawer lay a letter my mother had written to me shortly before her death, intended to guide me should I inherit Rosewood earlier than expected. I had read it countless times over the past 12 years, but tonight its words carried new meaning. Remember, Catherine, that being a Montgomery means holding Rosewood in trust, not just for our family, but for history itself. This responsibility will sometimes feel overwhelming, even isolating, but never forget that Rosewood exists to be lived in, to create joy, to connect past and future through the lived experience of the present. Guard it carefully, but don't become a prisoner of its legacy. The most successful stewards have always found ways to honor tradition while embracing their own moment in time. The morning of the conference dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for showcasing Rosewood at its finest. From my bedroom window, I watched early light illuminate the grounds, the formal gardens where Olivia directed last-minute preparations, the restored architectural elements gleaming with fresh paint and polish, staff moving with purpose and pride as they prepared to welcome prestigious guests. This moment represented the culmination of 16 months of strategic planning, careful restoration, and systematic restructuring. Rosewood hadn't merely survived Richard's betrayal, it had emerged stronger, more resilient, better positioned for the future than it had been before my accident. As I dressed for the opening ceremonies, I chose not my usual conservative business attire but a dress in Montgomery blue, the shade that appeared in our family crest, symbolizing loyalty and steadfastness. The cane I still occasionally used for longer walks had been replaced for today with an elegant walking stick that had belonged to my great-grandmother, its silver handle engraved with the Montgomery motto, Fortitudine Vincimus, through endurance. We conquer. Eleanor met me in the grand hall as the first guests began to arrive. Everything is perfect, she assured me. The staff is ready, the presentations are set, and I've just heard that registration has exceeded expectations by nearly 30 attendees. I nodded, scanning the space with a critical eye. And our special employees? Ms. Winters is conducting the technical briefing for the garden tour guides, focusing on the historical authenticity of the restoration. She's become quite the expert on Montgomery planting traditions. Eleanor paused, then added with a hint of amusement. She appears to have developed genuine respect for your family's horticultural legacy. Appropriate consequences often yield unexpected benefits, I observed. And Richard? Eleanor's expression darkened slightly. No attempts to contact or approach the property. Our sources indicate he's taken a position with a development firm in Chicago, about as far from historical preservation as one could get. Good. I had no desire for Richard's shadow to fall across Rosewood's moment of triumph. Our legal separation had been finalized 3 months earlier. The divorce proceedings were moving forward without contest, and the non-disclosure agreements remained firmly in place. Whatever new life he was building now existed entirely separate from the Montgomery legacy. Victoria Lockwood approached as the hall began filling with distinguished guests. Catherine, you've outdone yourself. Rosewood has never looked more magnificent. Thank you, Victoria. Though the credit belongs to many. Hands. Her knowing smile suggested she understood the deeper significance of the day. True leadership has always been about orchestrating others' talents toward a common vision. The Montgomerys have excelled at this for generations. As the time approached for my keynote address, I took a moment alone in my father's study. Now, my own, to center myself. On the desk lay the speech I had prepared, outlining Rosewood's journey from crisis to opportunity, detailing the restoration processes and management innovations that had transformed potential disaster into institutional triumph. But as I picked up the pages, I realized a significant element was missing from the carefully crafted text. The speech addressed the professional victory, but said nothing of the personal transformation that had made it possible. It described what we had accomplished, but not why it mattered beyond historical preservation principles. Taking a blank sheet of paper, I quickly drafted a new introduction, one that spoke to the heart of what Rosewood represented, not just as a historical property, but as a living legacy that connected generations through shared values and purpose. Minutes later, I stood at the podium in the Grand Hall, facing the assembled leaders of the historical preservation community. The room fell silent as I surveyed the audience, making brief eye contact with key figures. Eleanor and Marcus standing proudly near the back, Martha and the senior staff lined along the side wall, Victoria and the board members in the front row, and somewhat surprisingly, Olivia quietly seated among the garden preservation specialists, her expression attentive and respectful. Distinguished colleagues, honored guests, welcome to Rosewood Estate, I began, setting aside my prepared notes. For 2 centuries, these grounds and buildings have stood as a testament to the Montgomery family's belief that our greatest treasures should be protected not just for ourselves, but for future generations. Today, as we gather to discuss historical preservation challenges and innovations, I want to share a story about legacy, betrayal, and the unexpected paths to renewal. For the next 30 minutes, I spoke with uncharacteristic openness about Rosewood's recent journey, the accident that had nearly claimed my life, the discovery upon waking that my husband had moved his mistress into my ancestral home, and the strategic response that had transformed crisis into opportunity. I spoke not just about architectural restoration and management restructuring, but about the harder, more personal work of rebuilding trust, redefining purpose, and reimagining what legacy truly means. The greatest threat to historical properties isn't physical deterioration, I concluded, but relevance. When we fail to connect our preservation efforts to meaningful human experiences, when we protect buildings but neglect the values and stories they embody, we risk creating beautiful museums that speak to no one's heart. Rosewood's journey. Over the past 16 months has taught me that true preservation isn't about freezing the past in amber. It's about creating living bridges between generations, ensuring that what mattered to those who came before us remains meaningful to those who will follow. The standing ovation that followed was unexpected, but deeply affirming. As I made my way through the crowd afterward, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about Rosewood's innovative approaches, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me since waking in that hospital room 16 months earlier. Later that evening, as the formal reception concluded and guests departed for their accommodations, I found myself alone in the rose garden, my mother's favorite retreat, and now, thanks to Olivia's unexpected dedication, restored to its former glory. The heritage roses released their perfume into the evening air, their historical varieties representing nearly 2 centuries of Montgomery, women's horticultural passions. Ms. Montgomery. Olivia's voice came softly from the garden path. I apologize for disturbing your solitude. I was checking the arrangements for tomorrow's specialized tour. No apology necessary, I replied, turning to face her. The gardens have exceeded all expectations. Your work here has been remarkable. She approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance. Thank you. Though I can't take credit for the design, I've merely restored what your family created over generations. Sometimes restoration requires more vision than original creation, I observed, particularly when significant damage has occurred. Something shifted in her expression, a recognition that we were discussing more than garden rehabilitation. You spoke today about transformation, about finding an opportunity in betrayal. I nodded. Every crisis contains possibilities, if one has the courage to look beyond the immediate damage. I've been thinking about what happens when my contract ends, she said after a thoughtful pause. About what kind of life I might build after repaying my debt to Rosewood. I studied her in the fading light, noting how completely she had changed from the ambitious interior designer who had so confidently moved into my home. The superficial glamour was gone, replaced by something more substantial, a genuine appreciation for historical authenticity, a hard-earned understanding of lasting value versus temporary trends. Your contract specifies 3 years of service, I replied. But it doesn't prohibit advancement within that framework, provided your performance merits recognition. Hope flickered briefly in her eyes. Advancement? Rosewood's restructuring includes succession planning for all key roles. Our current garden historian is approaching retirement age with no obvious replacement among the existing staff. I gestured toward the meticulously restored rose beds. Your work here demonstrates both technical skill and genuine appreciation for historical context, rare qualities in combination. Would you consider me for a permanent position? After everything that happened? I would consider the person you've become, not the person you were, I clarified. Rosewood's interests are served by retaining proven talent, regardless of complicated beginnings. As Olivia processed this unexpected possibility, I realized I was implementing the final piece of Rosewood's systematic restructuring, transforming a former adversary into a potential asset, converting a cautionary tale into a redemption story that reinforced the estate's central values. Think about it, I added. The position would require formal training in historical landscape preservation, which could be arranged through our educational partnerships. Your performance over the next year would determine whether such an investment is warranted. After she departed, visibly overwhelmed by this unexpected opportunity, I remained in the garden as twilight deepened into night. Stars appeared above Rosewood's ancient oaks, the same stars that had witnessed 2 centuries of Montgomery stewardship, the same stars that would shine long after my own chapter in this ongoing story concluded. 16 months ago, I had awakened in a hospital room to discover profound betrayal. My husband moving his mistress into my ancestral home while I fought for my life. The shock, the violation, the calculated attempt to erase my family's legacy might have broken someone else. Instead, it had catalyzed a transformation that extended far beyond simply removing the interlopers from my property. Now Richard worked a continent away, his connection to Rosewood severed completely. Olivia tended the gardens she had once tried to modernize, her designer ambitions replaced by genuine appreciation for historical authenticity. And I had rebuilt not just Rosewood's management structure and physical spaces, but my own understanding of what the Montgomery legacy truly meant. As I made my way back toward the house, moving more easily now than I had in months, I passed the spot where generations of Montgomery women had taken their wedding portraits. My mother, my grandmother, myself with Richard a decade ago. The white rose arbor framed the main house perfectly, creating the iconic image that had graced Rosewood's promotional materials for decades. Tomorrow would bring another full day of conference activities, specialized tours, panel discussions, networking opportunities for the preservation community, important work that would further cement Rosewood's reputation as a leader in historical stewardship. But tonight, in this moment of quiet completion, I allowed myself to acknowledge the deeper truth beneath the professional triumph. The woman, who had left Rosewood on that rainy October day 16 months ago, was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and unexpectedly, more open to the future. What my husband hadn't realized as he sat nervously by my hospital bed, hiding evidence of his betrayal, was that during my recovery, I wouldn't just be healing my broken body. I'd be creating a new vision for Rosewood, and for myself. And now, both his mistress and Richard himself worked for my estate in different ways. She tended the gardens with growing expertise. He served as a cautionary example in my presentations on institutional vulnerability. The most elegant revenge, after all, isn't destruction but transformation, turning betrayal into opportunity, crisis into renewal, enemies into assets. The Montgomery women had always understood this fundamental truth, passing it down through generations of Rosewood stewards, fortitudine vincamus. Through endurance we conquer, not by breaking what threatens us, but by building something stronger, in response. Something that will endure long after individual betrayals have faded into footnotes in the greater story of a legacy preserved. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.